Hi, this is Imtiaz Popat, and welcome to Access TV. With me today is Beverly Nann from the Vancouver Asian Heritage Month Society, and Karin Lee, who's got a show opening during Asian Heritage Month at the new QueerSUM Gallery, which is run by the Pride and Art Society. Welcome to Access TV.
Thank you for having us here.
Happy to be here.
So Beverly, you've been involved with Asian Heritage Month for many years. You're currently the Vice President, but you were there in the very beginning, and Karin, so were you. We were one of the first artist who started this whole thing from a one-day event to now a full-fledged festival called Explore Asian. So tell us about, May is Asian Heritage Month. When did we start celebrating Asian Heritage Month here in Vancouver?
Well, actually, there are a number of pre-festival events which are taking place in April. But I guess your coverage won't really cover April, but it does get underway actually April the 18th with National Canadian Film Day, which we participate in. But the official opening is next Saturday at the Simon Fraser University Woodward Centre. But most of our events, of course, are taking place in May because May is National Asian Heritage Month, and the Society has been actually, for the past 22 years, providing a platform for the showcasing of arts and culture emerging out of our Pan-Asian communities.
So it usually goes from mid-April into mid-June even.
That's right.
Yeah. And so there's a lot that goes on.
Well, it's a huge Pan-Asian community.
Right.
There are over between 50, 60 events, and we're still getting events submitted onto our website. It's too late for our publications, but it's wonderful to see that the Pan-Asian community is really responding.
It started as a one-day event many years ago, Karin. You were part of that, and now it's come out to this big festival called Explore Asian, featuring Asian artists from Turkey all the way to Korea. So what was it like in those early days?
You know, it's really incredible how it's grown to where it is. At the beginning, when we were looking at how do we showcase Asian Canadian culture, it was just a few people, Winston Shin, some video artists, and then some literary events with Jim Wong Chu and those writers. And the idea was, following some other exhibitions that took place in Vancouver, Racy Sexy, that was at the Chinese Cultural Center, Self Not Whole, and we were looking at some way of actually articulating what is Asian Canadian culture, not Asian culture, but actually Asian Canadian culture. So what Asian Heritage Month is now doing 22 years later is wonderful because it showcases not only just sort of the traditional expressions of Asian Canadian artists, but also looks at the contemporary sort of articulation of what it means in terms of our identity and our culture to be Asian Canadian. So at that time, there wasn't really very much, and also there was very little money, and there was very little support from the larger sort of community. And you've got a lot of corporate sponsors, you've got a lot of support now, and so that's sort of a testament to how it's grown and how you've developed it so much. But in those early days, there was just a few people, a few programs, and just the seed that was planted to where it is today.
Well, the society, when it first started, it was really because of the lack of representation of Pan-Asian artists and culture in the mainstream. And so we provided a lot of help to the Pan-Asian artists in the beginning with production. But now, 22 years later, there are many professional Pan-Asian companies that have emerged. But the biggest challenge right now is with the growing size of the Asian communities, they're becoming institutionally complete. They don't need anybody else. And so that creates a problem, I think, for our multicultural society. Because, we need to begin to open up those communities. And the festival I see as really a window into that Pan-Asian community and encouraging the artists and the community to collaborate and get to know one another. We've got to open those doors of the ethnic silos that are growing out there.
So the theme this year is Pan-Asian Roots, and this festival guide, which is in the Courier now, you can find that lists all the different events that are happening during Asian Heritage Month Exploration Festival.
Well, there's a whole 2 pages,
2 pages.
of over 50 events.
Yeah, and
And-
otherwise you can go to exploration.org to find out the different events.
And the thing is, most of them are free.
That's right.
So there should be no barrier for people participating.
Right. I'm now actually the program chair for next year building up, and I'm actually doing 3 events. We're doing a chai house at the Smiley Center on May 6th. I'm also doing a tour of Punjabi market, and we're doing a workshop on Asianness. What is it to be Asian? And there is also exhibition at the Vancouver Public Library, the Moat Gallery, on Pan-Asian roots. What are some of the other highlights, Beverly?
Yeah, well, the Vancouver Public Library, the Central Branch, they're featuring 101 Filipino films, and there's a very classic film that's being presented. This is one way of getting to know our growing Filipino community, and it sort of focuses on the influence of the colonial period in the Philippines.
Right.
So,
And this year, there's going to be a tribute to 2 important people who are part of Asian Heritage Month. Is Mel Tobias, who's
right.
big in the Filipino community, in the film community, and Jim Wong Chu, and his exhibition will be opening at Emily Carr in June.
well, it's going to be later.
Oh,
now.
okay.
Yeah.
So that's coming up.
Yeah.
And of course, Karin, you are part of this amazing new QueerSUM gallery, which is here in Chinatown, run by the Pride and Art Society, who does the annual Pride Festival at the Roundhouse. But now there's a permanent gallery here in Chinatown, the QueerSUM gallery. Tell us about that,
Yeah.
and tell us about your show.
Thank you. The Queer Arts Pride and Art Society, as you know, as you said, has been running a festival every year in July, June, and they are now funded as a permanent gallery. So they're the first queer arts gallery in all of Canada, believe it or not, with a permanent gallery. And they were very kind to ask me to be the opening show. My show is called QueerSUM, and it runs from May the 12th to August the 18th. And the idea of having a show with an Asian Canadian, Chinese Canadian artist is the idea is if the Queer Arts Gallery is placed in Chinatown, and of course in this particular space there are a lot of arts and cultural institutions. So they wanted to have their first artist as a Chinese Canadian. And I have a very long-standing kind of history with Chinatown. My parents worked here. My dad had a store in East Hastings. My mother worked in the Ford building. You know, I'm 4th generation Chinese Canadian, and also have a lot of roots with the Indigenous communities. So with that in mind, they had asked me if I would have this show. And the show is called QueerSUM because it talks about this idea of thinking about being queer, whether you're exactly queer or not. So therefore, QueerSUM. And the gallery is called SUM because SUM in Cantonese means heart. And the 4th floor of the old Hans building actually was supposed to be a dim sum restaurant. Now they called it SUM because they didn't want to use Mandarin. Well, I suggested, please don't use Mandarin, please use Cantonese, because Cantonese is the language which all the pioneer Chinese Canadians used when they first came here. And SUM means heart. So it also means, you know, it's also the sum of all things. So you can have, you know, I don't know what that symbol is, but it sort of looks like SUM.
So
It's
tell
the
us
addition.
tell us more about your show. What's in your show?
So in my show there are 3 pieces. One is My Sweet Peony, and I shot that in the Sun Yat-sen Gardens in 1993. And it was the first film that the Sun Yat-sen Gardens allowed to be filmed there. And it's basically about a Chinese Canadian woman who is sort of confused about her sexuality. So it's a sort of a magic realism kind of film, and she is hounded by a number of different characters. One is like a white feminist who wants to, you know, bring her into the fold of feminism. Another one is like, a white guy who, you know, went to China and studied Chinese and had more to, you know, say that he knew more about Chinese culture than she did. And then lastly, there's a Chinese Canadian queer person who she suddenly realizes that she has much more, in common with than these other people. And then there's a trickster in there. There's a Taoist monk who's a trickster. So it's kind of a fun play on identity and sexuality, culture, and so on.
And so it opens on May 12th, but it runs right into the Pride season.
Yes.
Which is great.
Yeah.
So.
And then the other two pieces is, one is a Mandarin. There's a woman in Beijing who talks about her sexuality, and that's in Mandarin with English subtitles. And then the third piece is called Small Pleasures, and it's a short film which is in Chinook jargon, only Chinook jargon, which was a trade language that they use here on the West Coast before English became the dominant colonial language. And so these three characters, Chinese First Nation and a white woman, they talk about feminism, centralized on the idea that the female character, the Chinese female character, had bound feet. So it's an interesting kind of discussion that they had. And the reason that I did it in Chinook jargon is because that's what my great-grandmother used to communicate with non-Chinese people. So again, this is a really important piece of work that should be here in Chinatown, because it's a Chinese person who is a settler immigrant but ended up learning Chinook jargon, which is an important part of our history here on the West Coast.
I'm really looking forward to that.
Thank you.
I'm sure
So am I.
Yeah. And there's so much more to talk about during Asian Heritage Month, but we're out of time. So you can go to exploration.org to find out all the different events happening during Asian Heritage Month. I'm sure we'll get your show on there as well. And this is it. Thank you, Beverly, for being here with us, and Karin. And this is Imtiaz Popat saying thank you for watching Access Community Television, shamelessly promoting our friends and community.